it's appropriate that as we reflect this evening on the role of the prosecutor, that we also reference for just a moment, reflect further on the idea of mass incarceration in the United States. Prosecutors' offices have historically played a major role in our country's dramatic reliance on jails and prisons. Mass incarceration, by definition, refers to the fact that the United States is by far the leading country in terms of incarceration and prison population. The number of people incarcerated in the United States has multiplied 5 times over since the 1980s to a total of almost 2.2 million people. And this dramatic rise has continued independent of crime either rising or falling, which is very, very interesting. But as we know, mass incarceration doesn't affect all communities equally. About 60% of the population of incarcerated people in America are either Black or Hispanic. 1 in 3 Black men will experience time in prison in his lifetime. 1 in 6 Hispanic men will experience time in prison during their lifetime. This issue is especially important in Tennessee, where the number of incarcerated people per capita is well above the national average. We see the same dynamics, and we also see the same demographic dynamics at play here. 22% of African Americans in Tennessee currently are unable to vote due to previous convictions. That is over 1 in every 5 people. Most people that go through the criminal legal system today waive their right to a trial, and in so doing, waive their right to a host of protections that come along with that trial, including the right to appeal. Instead, they plead guilty. Very few cases go to trial. 97% of the federal criminal convictions are obtained through plea bargains. And when it comes to the states aren't far behind. That percentage is at 94%. Criminal convictions are obtained through plea bargain. This process has become such a basis for court operation that in 2012, Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy acknowledged that plea bargaining is, quote unquote, not some adjunct to the criminal justice system. It is the criminal justice system. Because of plea bargains, the system can quickly handle the criminal cases of millions of Americans each year involving crimes or from anything that would be fairly petty in nature to very serious crimes. But plea bargains make it easy or easier for prosecutors to convict defendants who may not be guilty, who don't present a danger to society, or whose crime may primarily be a matter of suffering from something such as poverty or mental illness or addiction. Thanks in part to plea bargains, millions of Americans now have a criminal record. In 2011, the National Employment Law Project estimated that figure to be at 65 million Americans with a criminal record. And it is a mark that can carry with it significant consequences for things like education and employment and housing. Having a record, even for a fairly trivial offense, means that a person may very well face tougher consequences or more serious punishment if he or she has to encounter the legal system again. Along these lines, it's also appropriate for us to touch for just a moment on the elected terms of district attorneys in the state of Tennessee. District attorneys in Tennessee serve the longest terms for elected prosecutors in the nation, which is very interesting. 8 years. And this lengthy term was set as far back as our state's constitution in 1870. Once in office, interestingly enough, many of these district attorneys serve for decades. Hamilton County, our home county here, serves as a perfect example of this. We have had 4 individuals serve as district attorney general in Hamilton County since 1958. And that is a remarkable, level of influence in the hands of a very, very few people when it comes to our criminal legal system and how it operates. 4 district attorney generals in the last 64 years. In spite of the importance of this elected role in our county and other county offices, local elections often suffer and lag far behind voting participation when it comes to a comparison to those who participate in the much more publicized national elections. The last time our community had the opportunity to vote for a district attorney general was in the year 2014. And out of over 206,000 registered voters, less than 16% of those individuals chose to cast a vote. And this is an opportunity for those of us in the community who care about our communities and our neighborhoods and the people that we live and do life with. This gives us an opportunity to speak out on the values that we would most like to see reflected in this particular office. But it's also a time for us to better acquaint ourselves and to educate ourselves on how these systems work and how they affect our friends and our families, our neighbors, our neighborhoods, and our communities. And to help us do that tonight, we are joined by 2 guests with unique insight into the role of prosecutors. And at this point, I want to pass the baton to my friend and colleague, the Reverend Troy Brand of the Orchard Park Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so, Troy, at this point, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you, Mike, and I appreciate that overview. Very insightful and helpful for those who are not, or just not familiar or slightly familiar with the role of a prosecutor. And I think we're going to get a lot more details about what you shared from our 2 presenters.
And so I was a prosecutor here for 5 years and prosecuted thousands of cases from low-level misdemeanors to the most serious cases, murder cases, death penalty cases, those kinds of things. Awesome. I've had my private practice for 25 years over in the Fort Wood section of Chattanooga, and we represent people in state and federal court. I understand the role of the prosecutor. I also understand the potential problems that prosecutors can sometimes have, especially with the issues of mass incarceration. One thing I would point out, though, is that in every case, one of the first determinations you need to make is it a victimless crime or is it a crime that involves a victim? Because the same neighborhoods that are plagued with mass incarceration are also plagued with violent crime. And anytime that there is a case where there's a victim, those victims need to be watched out for and protected. And that's one of the most important roles that a prosecutor has. When it's a victimless crime, when it's crimes of basically where you're prosecuting poverty or you're prosecuting drugs, you're prosecuting things where someone is hurting themselves as opposed to somebody else, those are the ones that definitely need to be looked at more closely.
Just a big picture introduction, that different studies estimate the number of wrongful convictions to be between 1% and 6%. Some studies estimate as high as 10%. But Mike gave such a wonderful introduction when he showed those statistics about mass incarceration. And so, I think, and I haven't looked at them recently, but TDOC reports their statistics for the Tennessee Department of Corrections, as at any given time, you'll have approximately 30,000 Tennesseans serving some sort of a sentence through TDOC, whether it's incarcerated in a prison or community corrections. So if you think about 1 to 6% of those individuals, let's say it's just 1%. Let's just say it's 10 people that are in prison wrongfully convicted. We believe as a society that that's unacceptable and we need to fix that. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight, I think the pitch is that if someone in the system, whether it's a prosecutor, a judge, or a defense attorney, doesn't get it right, we're going to see those at the Tennessee Innocence Project. We're going to have to try to really at that point move a mountain, because it is nearly impossible to overturn a conviction. And so, as we kind of talk about this, we're going to hear how all of these parties play an important role, but the reality is the prosecutor early on has the ability to make really crucial decisions about who is charged, how they're charged, and what happens next.
Excuse me real quick, Lee. So what you're telling us is police officers make arrests based on what the prosecutor is going to charge. Is that a simple way of saying that?
I think that's one way of looking at it. I can't say across the board that's what happens, but I think police officers could certainly arrest anyone who violates the law, and the law is what the law is. I think once someone is arrested or cited, how they're dealt with thereafter often becomes the decision of the prosecutor.
Okay, thank you.
And I can give sort of a local flavor of how that happens here. So here in Chattanooga, Hamilton County, let's say there's an arrest on a Friday or Saturday night. Police they pull over a car, tinted windows. They say they smell marijuana. They get the people out and they arrest them for either a small amount of marijuana or odor of alcohol in the DUI. So it's a standard arrest. Those individuals will either make bond or not make bond over the weekend, and they'll go to Hamilton County General Sessions Court Monday or Tuesday morning. And this is where one of the fundamental problems occurs. In General Sessions Court, you have, that's where the assistant district attorneys are. So you have the elected DA who serves the 8-year term that we talked about. And then you have assistant district attorneys that are assigned to one of the 3 General Sessions divisions on the 2nd floor of the courthouse. And every week, the same thing happens. People are arrested over the weekend come into court. People in custody go to courtroom 4 or courtroom 3. People not in custody go to one of the other courtrooms. And then prosecutors are trying to sort out who do they keep in custody, who do they make an initial plea offer to. Maybe there was something involving violence, so they want to have a preliminary hearing later. And what do they have to do? They have to assess credibility very quickly. The same police officers who made the arrests are there. Those police officers, the district attorneys see week in and week out. So if let's say it's one of these situations where a car gets pulled over for the smell of marijuana. Well, to me, that's a very questionable stop, right? I mean, how did you smell them? How would you driving down the road smelling marijuana? Unless it's billowing out of the car, it's a pretty suspect reason to stop somebody. But a judge, a General Sessions judge, is put in a very difficult position if they're going to have to assess the credibility of the police officer they see every week, or the person who just got arrested over the weekend. So, and an assistant district attorney, even a well-intentioned one, is going to have to buck the system and say, I don't trust that officer's judgment, or I think that there was a ulterior motive to why they wanted to get this person into custody, or, because again, many of these problems start with best interests in mind. Maybe the young officer thought he was going to get a bigger drug bust when he pulled the person over. Maybe he thought he was profiling and he was going to try to clean up that neighborhood. But in reality, what he's done is he's arrested somebody on either no probable cause or such little probable cause that it should not be a lawful arrest. But then that gets passed on to the assistant district attorney. And how candid is that person going to be, meaning the arresting officer, to the assistant district attorney? Then the defendant, who just met his public defender, if he hasn't hired a lawyer, has about 5 or 10 minutes to try to get across that public defender. It's like, we weren't smoking anything, and that small amount of weed that was in the bag has been in there for a week. We should be able to make bond because we really weren't doing anything wrong other than driving late at night and we got pulled over. So all of that gets compressed into that initial situation at Monday morning at 8:30 times about 70. There'll be about 70 of those cases on each one of those dockets. So you can see where, and I tell this to my clients, my initial goal in a case is to slow it down enough on Monday morning so the DA sees you as a person and not a docket number on the outside of the case. And so if you're looking for like, where does the system first separate from a person's rights? It's during that first 15 minutes, because people are having to make judgments of credibility and judgments about things. And it's so ingrained in their weekly routine that many prosecutors don't even realize they're doing it. It's certainly not out of any malevolence. It's out of, and that gets back to the whole plea bargain cycle. It's out of wanting to move that docket through the system. And that's happening. You can come down, Troy, you can be my guest. I'll take you down Monday morning and we'll go into sessions court and you can watch it happening in real time.
Wow. Yeah, I would like to do that. That'd be great. So you mentioned, and both of you can speak to this. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, Troy, I was just going to add, I don't think anyone on this call, I don't think this is news to anyone who's taken an interest in criminal justice reform. But, and I'm sure Lee has had this experience too. When you get these cases and somebody's been arrested and had no idea they were going to be arrested, maybe they were just driving down the road and they ran over the yellow line in the middle and got pulled over. And then there was something in their car that they end up getting arrested on. But oftentimes these arrests don't happen with people knowing they're about to go spend the weekend away from their family. So when we often meet with clients, there is a level of, as you can imagine, you are living your life in one moment, and the next you are being arrested and put in jail. Your kids, your family, your job, your pets, all of those things, you don't have time to make arrangements. You have been arrested. So, having an opportunity, as I'm sure y'all know, to make a bond or be released if it's a nonviolent offense is really, really critical, because I have had clients who want to plead guilty simply because they have obligations. They have a life to get back to, and these are minor offenses. And that's really, really disheartening.
And it's not uniform. Some are better than others. If you take an office that has 25 assistant DAs, you may have half a dozen that are really good and do their job and take this seriously and can get to the bottom of it. And you may have a half a dozen who don't. And if you're practicing law as a public defender or a private lawyer, you understand quickly who those people are, where they fall on that. And you have to explain that to your clients. Then, of course, there's the whole perspective of the defendant. You take my example, if that's an accidental shooting that happens in a housing project versus an accidental shooting that happens up on Signal Mountain, the perceptions of how law enforcement greet that accident, the perceptions how the court and how the prosecutors, and a lot of this stuff, it's not intentional. It's just who these people are and what their socioeconomic background is. Mm-hmm. And then justice becomes very uneven, that you see and how it's dispensed and how it's experienced if the same resources are not expended in those two cases. If that makes it clear.
Right. Yeah, it makes it clear. You said that there's sole discretionary power that lies with the DA or the prosecutor. So what you're saying is the police officer can't say, hey, charge. He can say it, but he can't. He has no legal grounds to charge. The judge
after arrest.
Right.
So once the arrest happens, so the way you break it down, real simple, is whenever the conduct happens up to the point of arrest, that's the officer's discretion. Mm-hmm. From the arrest, once it gets down to the courthouse until the end of the case, to charge, to dismiss, to reduce, to enhance, sole discretion is in the prosecutor's hands. The judge can accept or reject a plea. The judge cannot change it, cannot change the terms, cannot change the charges.
Wow. And so I know this is an obvious question. How does that work as far as demographics are concerned? What have you guys seen? It's fair across the board. The DA treats everybody the same, I'm sure, and you guys have seen these DAs deal fairly with every person, no matter what ethnicity, male, female, or whatever. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, I think which in your question, that's probably getting at before, is the obvious cases where if you have a prosecutor the system can deal with that. If you have a prosecutor who's intentionally doing something against somebody because of their race, their gender, their orientation, well, you can respond to that. What's insidious about it is if you're somebody from an impoverished background and there's high crime already in your neighborhood. It's going to be over policed to start with. So if you're smoking marijuana with your friends on the corner, you're already going to be under more suspicion than if you're doing the same thing behind a middle school in another part of the county. And so when you come into the system, the rough-handed nature of it, or the uneven nature of the justice system, is there are so many perceptions that come with the people as they come into the system. And so who your lawyer is, what kind of lawyer you have, what the background of the officer is when he's making contact with you, the actual circumstances of the arrest become critically important. We had I think it was a DoorDash driver delivering African-American DoorDash driver delivering a meal out in Collegedale night before last. Officer pulls him over. The young man has no idea why he's being pulled over. Gets tased. He's doing DoorDash. He gets tased. The district attorney just announced today he's asking the sheriff's department to investigate that officer. So that's good.
Wow.
So that's good. But that's what I mean by that's an obvious example. You take 3 young African-American men who have a small amount of weed on the corner, and they get pushed up against the wall, frisked, and then they find a handgun on one, and then they put them all in on Friday, and they're going to spend all weekend in jail, and they come out Monday morning into sessions court, and all 3 of them are charged for some small violation. You're never going to read about that. You're never going to hear about that. But they may take that simple misdemeanor plea, 1129, suspended on good behavior, because you get out of jail. It's just a misdemeanor on your record, so it seems like it's not a big deal, but it's a conviction. I have young men come into my office all the time and say, hey, how do I get this off my record? I've been offered a job and they're going to do a background check. And I'm like, you pled guilty 3 years ago. It doesn't come off your record. And so, and then on the public defender side of things, they're well-intentioned, but they have huge caseloads. And then they have a young man in custody, and they may say, well, if we can reset this and have a hearing, we can get this dismissed. And the person's like, I don't reset it. I want out. It's Monday. I've been in here since Friday. I'm going to lose my job if I'm not there tomorrow morning. And so that's where people get ground up, meaning literally their lives ground up, because the system, it's a very blunt instrument. And then, of course, the worst examples of that end up in Jessica's office.
This whole system is built on human beings. And so we really emphasize that people could be wrongfully convicted or kind of swallowed up by the system, not because anybody did anything intentionally, but just because there's been a change in science. We now know more than we used to. We can do DNA testing we weren't able to. And so for us, when you talk about progressive district attorneys, I think Larry Krasner is probably the most well-known, and it's about a willingness to evaluate the work of the office and the convictions that have taken place. And then I think a truly progressive district attorney will not only fix those individual errors that may have been made, but then they're also going to ask, how can we take this information that we've learned and make sure we prevent future wrongful convictions? How can we make the system better? So my answer to that is pretty narrow as it applies to the work that we do. Are you willing to explore wrongful convictions or the possibility of a wrongful conviction? It could also be that, we all agree to do testing in a case, whether it's fingerprint or DNA, and it could come back and prove that the person's guilty and that the system got it right. To me, it's about a willingness to engage in that process and really explore if this was a mistake in the system.
There's a podcast. This is for everybody listening. There's a podcast. If you haven't heard it, it's called Justice in America. It's an excellent podcast. They have about 30 episodes or so, and it just goes through justice in America, justice system in America. I recommend it to everyone. In a podcast that talks about the role of the prosecutor, one of the points they made, and I want you to expand on this. They said there's an equation in every prosecutor's office across America. That equation is power, accountability, and incentives. The prosecutor has lots of power, they say. They have little accountability, and they have incentives both ways, incentives to get a lot of convictions because they'll keep getting elected. And they'll have no incentives to hold police accountable. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? Why or why not? Lots of power, little accountability.
You mean
incentives?
I'll hop in on that. Absolutely true on the power. Absolutely true on the little accountability. Prosecutors, I mean, I think if you ask most people, if you went out on the street and asked people who the prosecutors are, they'd have no idea. A friend of mine ran for public defender 8 years ago, and he was going door to door. And the average person thinks the public defender, think of what the name sounds like, defend the public, was the prosecutor. He had to educate voters that, no, I'm on the other side from the prosecutor. So that gets back to the no accountability. I think it's largely been an invisible position over time. That's changing. That's definitely changing. I think that with the accountability about the police, that's also changing with technology. Cell phones and body cams have made that, I've been practicing law 35 years. Cell phones and body cams in the last 10 to 15 years have completely changed that. Good ethical prosecutors, like the news story that broke today about the Collegedale officer who tased the young food driver. Good ethical prosecutors follow the evidence. And so when there's a citizen cell phone or a body cam on an officer and it shows a violation, they follow that. We've been talking all about state court, and we've been talking about state court prosecutors. There's a whole nother level. There's the federal side, federal prosecution, and there are civil rights divisions, both locally and at a main justice in DC. Those organizations will get involved. I mean, the federal prosecutors will get involved if they see a system of civil rights violation in a local police or local district attorney's office. Now, it's got to be an order of magnitude, but those things are out there. And I think that having public integrity sections out of main justice in DC helps. And really, it's having citizens who speak up and act out when they see this stuff happening in their communities. We are in a different justice system than the one I entered when I was a young attorney. And it's a better one. Now, there's still plenty of problems, but 25 years ago, there was no accountability. Now there is some accountability. And I'm not going to tell you that we're even close to where we need to be, but we're at least having those conversations. Even in communities like Chattanooga, those conversations are happening.
So, I think prosecutors set the tone for their office. And I think hiring diverse people with a wide variety of life experiences is really important to creating understanding of how our clients sometimes end up in these positions, whether they're guilty or innocent. For us, working with clients who are asserting their actual innocence, it's an open-mindedness to exploring whether there could have been mistakes made in the past, because this is a system comprised of humans. Jurors are humans, and they only know what they hear in the courtroom. So, a willingness to reflect on the work that's being done is really important.
I've watched drug courts grow up around the state, and mental health courts and veterans courts. And when assistant DAs become involved in the drug courts and the mental health courts, and they start connecting with these people, they become strong advocates for these issues. And if those assistant DAs, just like the elected DA sets the tone up top, the assistant DAs across the bottom, because they're the ones who serve on these committees on something like drug court, they take those experiences back to their bosses, and they're making relationships with the other private attorneys and public defenders that they serve on these committees. And then they have common ground on those issues. And then that can lead to either political solutions or longer term improvement of the justice system. So it comes down to relationships. It comes down to people realizing, don't vilify each other, but there's something we can all learn from each other. And no matter how much you think you may disagree with that prosecutor, talk to them. Sit down and talk to them and get them to come to you, because most of them are good people. there always are a few that are bad, right? And you can single those out, ask the court officers, they always know. And so once you get that, once you figure out who is the right person to approach, build on those relationships, and that will bring positive experiences back to your group.
Thank you all. Thank you to our guests. Thank you, Pastor Troy, Pastor Mike, for being a moderator and the host tonight. I guess what I would like to wrap it up with, definitely chiming into why this is important to us as the Criminal Justice Task Force. First one is liberty. It's the norm pending the pre-trial. The second one is justice for all without profit or excessive fees. And the third one is incarceration is the answer to mass incarceration. And what we asking for out of those things that we're core values that we're setting is build release without restriction. So basically have pre-trial support rather than supervision. Next, reducing time in custody. And also to collect better data and better pre-trial data here locally for the Hamilton County, our county itself. That reduced time in custody ties a lot into our Hamilton County Community Bail Fund. I guess I would end personally from a personal experience, since I'm a formerly incarcerated male, and this is something I've definitely wanted to think about how I wanted to push out. And I love that our presenters had actually spoke in on this. But one thing I would definitely want to say to you all is that we don't want to be able to, such as myself, I had a case that I ended up being innocent on, and that case lingered on for over a year, maybe a year and a half. And I can tell you during that case, I lost a lot. Place, cars, you name it, I lost a lot throughout that year and a half where I could not be employed or anything. But I can say through organizations like Caleb and other organizations here locally, I have seen there's a way out. Just because a person's formerly incarcerated doesn't determine their capabilities in their future or anything like that. So we all have the opportunity here today with the things that I brought up and the things that we talked about to help support. We would love for you all to come along with Caleb to be a part of this work that we're doing in the criminal legal system. We definitely want to, see something go right here locally, but we definitely want to see it go right with the right people leading it. And I definitely feel like people power and us coming together collectively will definitely make a change and a difference into what we're trying to do here in Hamilton County. And not just in Hamilton County, statewide. We definitely want to chime into that. We have partner sister organizations all throughout the state. We have Noah out of Nashville, and we have Micah out of Memphis that we definitely support, that we want to plan to go moving forward doing statewide things outside of the local things that we're doing here for us with Caleb.